What's happening right now between Caitlin Clark fans, Team USA, and the sudden backlash surrounding Aya Wilson feels like one of those moments that quietly reshapes an entire sport. At first glance, it doesn't even seem real. 1 week, Aya Wilson is being talked about as the unquestioned face of the WNBA. Next, she is completely missing from Team USA's senior national pool, while Caitlin Clark is officially handed a starting role for the future of American basketball. That single decision sent shockwaves everywhere. For years, the assumption felt unbreakable. Aya Wilson was untouchable. MVP awards, championships, Nike deals, media praise, all of it built a narrative that her spot on Team USA was permanent. Something she did not even need to earn anymore. It was simply expected. But Team USA shattered that illusion in one quiet, brutal move. They did not ease Wilson out. They did not give vague explanations. They simply moved on. And at the same time, they elevated Caitlin Clark. Not just included her, but formally positioned her as a cornerstone for the 2026 World Cup and the 2028 Olympics. For Clark fans, it felt like vindication. For Wilson supporters, it felt like betrayal. For the rest of the basketball world, it raised one unavoidable question. How did the most decorated star in the league get left behind? This story is not just about basketball. It is about ego, entitlement, pressure, and the harsh difference between domestic dominance and global competition. It is about what happens when reputation collides with reality. And most importantly, it is about the one flaw no one wanted to talk about until it was too late. By the end of this breakdown, you might see both players very differently, and you might understand why Team USA made a decision that many people still cannot process. To really understand how we reached this moment, you have to go back to when the tension first started bubbling beneath the surface. It didn't begin with Team USA. It didn't even begin with roster decisions. It started with something that should have been a celebration: Aya Wilson's Nike signature shoe reveal. On paper, this was supposed to be a victory lap, a defining milestone for one of the league's most accomplished stars. Instead, it became the moment where the public narrative around Wilson quietly began to fracture. The backlash was immediate, intense, and deeply personal. And at the center of it all were Caitlin Clark fans. For months leading up to that reveal, many fans had already been asking the uncomfortable question out loud. Why did it feel like the league was protecting certain players while openly resisting the rise of Clark? When Wilson's shoe was unveiled, instead of uniting the fan base, it poured gasoline on an already burning fire. Social media exploded with comparisons, accusations, and resentment that had been building for years. And here's the uncomfortable truth: this was not just about sneakers. It was about power, visibility, and who the league chose to elevate. Clark fans saw it as another example of the establishment rewarding loyalty over impact. They watched arenas sell out wherever Clark played, ratings spike whenever her name was attached to a broadcast, and yet the league continued to center its marketing around familiar faces. Wilson, fairly or not, became the symbol of that resistance. What made things worse was how Wilson responded. Instead of defusing the tension, her comments, likes, and subtle social media behavior only added fuel. Nothing overt, nothing directly attacking Clark, but enough passive signals to make fans feel dismissed. Enough to reinforce the idea that she viewed Clark's rise not as progress for the sport, but as a threat to her territory. That's when the narrative shifted. Slowly at first, then all at once. Wilson stopped being seen as just a dominant player. She started being viewed as the gatekeeper, the defender of the old order. And once that perception takes hold, it is incredibly hard to shake. By the time Team USA began evaluating players for future global competition, the tension was already baked in. The public saw a rivalry. The league saw optics. But the coaches were watching something else entirely. They were watching how players handled pressure when the spotlight wasn't flattering. For a long time, Aya Wilson lived in a world where her position felt permanent. MVP trophies, championship rings, endless praise from commentators and analysts who spoke about her as if her dominance was written into the constitution of the league. When you hear that kind of validation year after year, something dangerous can happen. You stop competing for your place. You start assuming it. And that assumption quietly became Wilson's blind spot. Inside the WNBA bubble, everything worked in her favor. The whistles, the pace, the rhythm of the game. Night after night, she went to the free throw line, built momentum, imposed her physicality, and controlled outcomes. From the outside, it looked like unstoppable greatness. But from the inside, Team USA evaluators were asking a very different question. What happens when the environment changes? International basketball does not care about reputation. It does not pause for stars. It does not reward theatrics. It strips the game down to its rawest form. Speed, strength, adaptability, and mental resilience. And that is where the illusion of untouchable status began to crack. Wilson had built a game that thrived on control. Control of the whistle. Control of matchups. Control of tempo. But international play offers none of that security. Physical contact is constant. Fouls are rare. Games flow without interruption. Players who rely on rhythm through stoppages often struggle to find their footing. Meanwhile, Caitlin Clark existed on the opposite end of that spectrum. She never needed permission to score. She never waited for a call. Her confidence came from knowing that no matter the conditions, no matter the court, no matter the officiating, she could still bend the game to her will. That difference matters more than fans realize. When Team USA scouts watched Wilson in international settings, they didn't see failure. They saw dependence. Moments where her instinct was to pause and look for a call instead of powering through. Moments where frustration crept into her body language when the game refused to bend around her expectations. That is the moment when status stops protecting you. Because at the national team level, no one is building around ego. They're building around reliability. And the truth is brutal. A player who believes she cannot be replaced is often the first one who is. There is a quiet moment every elite athlete faces the first time the game refuses to cooperate. For Aya Wilson, that moment did not arrive in a sold-out WNBA arena. It arrived under unfamiliar lights with international officials, unfamiliar rules, and zero patience for reputation. And in that moment, something shifted. The physicality was heavier. Hands stayed on hips. Bodies collided without whistles. Drives that once ended at the free throw line now ended in silence. No pause. No bailout. Just play on. You could see it in her shoulders first, a brief hesitation. Then in her eyes, a quick search for validation that never came. The rhythm she depended on simply was not there. Basketball at the international level is unforgiving in that way. It exposes habits. It punishes reliance. It demands instant adjustment. And adjustment is not about talent alone. It is about mentality. Do you adapt or do you resist? Wilson resisted, even if only subconsciously. Instead of flowing through contact, she expected it to be acknowledged. Instead of finishing through bodies, she waited for relief that never arrived. Frustration began to replace instinct. Possession slowed. Confidence wavered. The game moved forward without her permission, and that is something no superstar is ever prepared for. Meanwhile, on the other side of the evaluation, Caitlin Clark was thriving in the same chaos. Contact did not disrupt her rhythm. It fueled it. Missed calls did not frustrate her. They sharpened her focus. She adjusted angles, changed release points, and kept shooting. No pause, no complaint, just solutions. That contrast mattered. Team USA coaches were not looking for who dominated yesterday. They were searching for who would survive tomorrow, who remains dangerous when the rules change, who stays composed when comfort disappears. And in that environment, something became painfully clear. One player needed the game to work a certain way. The other made the game work no matter what. That realization did not happen loudly. It happened quietly, in notes taken, glances exchanged, and decisions slowly forming. And once those decisions begin to solidify, no amount of past glory can stop them. There's always a moment when power quietly changes hands. Not with an announcement, not with headlines, but with a realization that spreads through a room before anyone dare say it out loud. At Team USA evaluations, that moment arrived sooner than expected. Coaches started leaning forward when Caitlin Clark touched the ball. Teammates began cutting harder, sprinting wider, trusting that if they moved with purpose, she would find them. Energy shifted. The gym felt different when she was on the floor. Faster, sharper, alive. Clark was not demanding attention. She was earning it possession by possession. While others tried to showcase individual skills, Clark made everyone else better. She talked constantly, pointing, directing, encouraging. When a teammate missed, she nodded and clapped. When a defender bumped her mid-shot, she landed, reset, and fired again. No drama, no theatrics, just control. This is when the narrative flipped. The conversation stopped being about potential. It became about inevitability. Coaches were no longer asking if Clark could handle the role. They were asking how anyone else could possibly replace her. That kind of trust cannot be manufactured. It emerges naturally when leadership is real. For players who had built their identity on being the center of attention, this shift was unsettling. You could feel it. The room no longer revolved around reputation. It revolved around impact. And impact does not care how loud your past was. Elite basketball is not just evaluated through highlights. It is evaluated through behavior when no one thinks it matters. Team USA watches everything. The sideline reactions, the bench energy, the way players respond when they are not the focus. This is where character becomes visible. Caitlin Clark carried herself with a quiet confidence that never crossed into entitlement. She listened more than she spoke. She absorbed instruction. When corrected, she nodded and adjusted instantly. There was no visible ego, only hunger. By contrast, frustration showed differently in others. Arms crossed, delayed jogs, glances toward officials. Small signs, but signs nonetheless. And at the national level, those signs matter more than points. Representing your country is not about being the best scorer. It is about being the most reliable presence under pressure. Coaches ask themselves simple questions. Who keeps the locker room steady? Who absorbs stress instead of spreading it? Who elevates rather than divides? Clark answered those questions without ever needing to say a word. She showed resilience without bitterness, confidence without arrogance, joy without distraction, and in an environment where chemistry can decide gold or disappointment. That balance is priceless. For years, subtle comments and passive reactions have been brushed aside as competitiveness. But inside USA basketball, nothing exists in isolation. Patterns are noticed. Attitudes are tracked. Respect for teammates is not optional. When resentment becomes public, it stops being harmless. Every time Clark achieved something historic, the response from certain veterans was not celebration, but distance, silence, or worse, subtle dismissal. That does not go unnoticed by leadership tasked with building unity. Team USA is not a platform for personal grudges. It is a responsibility. Clark never responded, never defended herself publicly, never escalated tension. She let her game speak, and that restraint became one of her strongest arguments for inclusion. Because when pressure rises, the ability to remain composed is more valuable than raw dominance. The coaches were not choosing sides in a rivalry. They were choosing stability, and stability always wins. When the selection pool became clearer, reactions told the real story. Clark expressed gratitude. She spoke about learning, about opportunity, about the honor of simply being considered. Her tone was grounded, almost understated. She understood that this was not a reward, but a responsibility. On the other side, disbelief turned into anger. Phone calls, complaints, confusion over how something assumed could suddenly disappear. For someone used to unquestioned validation, exclusion felt personal. But Team USA decisions are never personal. They are practical. How you respond when the answer is no reveals more than how you perform when the answer is yes. One response projected maturity. The other projected entitlement. And once that contrast becomes clear, there is no unseeing it. Team USA is not built for yesterday. It is built for what comes next. The 2026 World Cup, the 2028 Olympics. New opponents, new styles, new pressure. The question was never who had the most accolades. It was those who could adapt, lead, and unify under the brightest lights. Clark checks every box. Her game translates globally. Her shooting ignores officiating. Her playmaking lifts teammates. Her demeanor calms chaos. She does not need the system to protect her. She becomes the system. That is why the decision felt inevitable once the evaluations began. One player created solutions. The other needed conditions. And at the highest level, conditions are never guaranteed. This moment marks a transition, whether people are ready to admit it or not. A shift from reliance on whistles to reliance on skill. From entitlement to accountability. From noise to substance. Caitlin Clark did not take anything from anyone. She earned what others assumed was permanent. And in doing so, she exposed a truth that professional sports never stop teaching. Nothing is owned. Everything is earned every single day. Team USA did not reject a star. They selected a leader. And as the next international cycle begins, one thing is clear. The era of adapting the game to fit the player is ending. The era of players who adapt to any game has arrived. Now the only question left is simple. Who is ready to evolve, and who will be left behind?
Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more dives into Hollywood's hidden history.